recorded. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to the fourth edition of our webinar from IAF India chapter. This is Narthi here, welcoming you on behalf of the Martins, Sunny Walker, and the IAF India world. So fourth edition means we have four hands on the steering wheel. In fact, we have additional two hands from Sunny Walker, who will help us with the technology part. Thank you very much, Sunny Walker, for helping us. For many of us, Adobe is the first time, but Martin's made it so easy. In fact, Martin, today I started loving Adobe Connect than the previous time that we were in, right? So I'm definitely, needless to add, several hands from the tech team of IAF India has joined to make this webinar a reality and a wholesome experience for all of us. I must say this, Martin Gilbert, that for your high connection, which made us feel very comfortable and really ready to to host this. Several mails and tech walkthroughs, and we would all log in 1 hour back and make this a fantastic experience for all of us. So deeply appreciate the enormous care that you've taken at every point. So once again, thanks a lot. So participants, the bio of Martin Gilbreth and Martin Farrell is already with you. Some of you would have met Martin Farrell in the Bangalore conference in 2016 December. Thank you very much, Martin Farrell, for joining us today. So over to you, Martins and Sunny. So we are good to go now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. It's really a pleasure. I'll invite Sunny and Martin to introduce themselves in just a moment. First of all, I'll say a couple of words about myself and about the session. And while I do that, I encourage you, please, if you haven't already, please do use the general chat pod on the right of your screen to introduce yourselves and to chat with each other by text. So my name is Martin Gilbraith. I'm an IAF member in England and Wales and a certified professional facilitator. I've been facilitating about 20 years. And well, for about 30 years actually, but for clients for about 20 years. I've spent most of my career with the Institute of Cultural Affairs, the ICA, beginning in fact with a volunteer placement with ICA India 30 years ago in Pune. And it's a very long time since I've been, but I'm looking forward to joining your Chennai conference in November. So I hope I'll meet some of you then. So it's very much a pleasure for us to be able to offer this webinar to you today. You'll see the title is Four Hands on the Steering Wheel, but already we have 6. We invited Sunny after the invitation to do the webinar, particularly for some extra technical support. But Sunny is a CPF herself and actually a founding member of IAF. So I hope, Sunny, you'll share some of your facilitation experience with us as well as supporting aspects. So the request from IAF India was for us to offer something on co-facilitation, request to Martin and I. And we thought for a few minutes and talked about it and decided we're facilitators. We'd much rather demonstrate and give you an experience of co-facilitation than simply ask you to listen to us. And on the whole, we prefer to facilitate than to talk, at least I do. So we agreed that we would offer to host this in Adobe Connect in order to give a much more participatory experience and to give you a chance to share and learn with each other as well as to learn from our experience. So for most of the webinar, I shall be playing the role of the facilitator. Martin Farrell will be playing the role of the presenter, and Sunny Walker will be playing the role of technical support. But we'll be switching those roles a little bit as we go through the session and hopefully demonstrating co-facilitation and teamwork in action. The agenda will be following is to the left of your screen. We'll be taking up to 90 minutes. After a few minutes of this overview and introductions, we'll invite Martin Farrell to speak to his experience of co-facilitation. And we'll take some questions and answers and then give you an opportunity to discuss your joys and sorrows, what's worked for you and what you found difficult in co-facilitation. Then we'll hear some more from Martin on his experience, a case study of co-facilitation in action. and also some do's. He's not going to focus on the don'ts, but we'll focus on the do's, and we can see the don'ts. And then some more questions and answers, some more discussion, until an opportunity to reflect together and share some feedback on the session before we close. If you have any questions as we go along, please do share them in the chat pod to the right. Let me invite Martin first of all, and then Sunny to introduce themselves in a few words. Martin, would you like to go ahead?
Certainly, thank you, Martin G. This is Martin F. Well, for me, this is a continuation of my wonderful experience in Bangalore last year. It was my first visit to India, and I now feel that I have an hour and a half of visiting India again. So thank you for this opportunity, and hello to everybody who's on this webinar, whom I had the pleasure of meeting over those couple of days. My experience has been my work experience has been entirely in civil society. Since I was 16, I've been working in charities and organizations who in one way or another are doing good, are trying to be decent, trying to develop a decent and sustainable world. So I've worked in large charities like the Red Cross and Save the Children Fund, and also very small ones, community development, refugees, and so on. And I started working independently in 1999, so I've been facilitating pretty much since then, and facilitating internationally since 2002. I jumped in the deep end. Well, actually, I was pushed in the deep end from my first facilitation internationally with the UN. So that was a steep learning curve, and to some extent it's been getting easier ever since. That was quite a baptism of fire. So I think that's probably brief enough for me to say, and then I'll say more when we start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And Sunny?
Like the two Martins, I've been doing facilitation for a long time, long before my hair was gray. In a very broad client base, but rarely the private sector, so much like Martin Farrell. And it's been years since I set foot on Indian soil. It was back in probably the 80s for a large event. I spent several months there. But in 2009, I was a virtual facilitator for a conference taking place face-to-face in India, and I was part of linking the rest of ICA International's membership from around the rest of the world in virtually for a week or so. And I was part of the facilitation team for the IAF's very first annual general meeting virtually, the foray into that world. And I have to tell you, as having been with IAF from, well, pretty much the beginning, to see such a strong presence and growth in IAF India is absolutely heating up my little heart here. So welcome everyone. I couldn't be happier. And I'll turn it back over to Martin, one of the Martins.
Thank you. Yes, I would echo that. After a little involvement in India many, many years ago, it's been very exciting to me to see how facilitation and IAF has taken off in recent years. And mostly my experience of it has been by Twitter. Many of you here today I've met on Twitter, and I'm hoping maybe one day to meet you face to face. So I should add as well, during the course of this webinar, please feel free to tweet or use your favored social media. If you look in the top left of the screen at the title of today's webinar, you'll see the hashtag, your hashtag, not ours, but FACIND, Facilitation India. So I suggest please do use that as you tweet. And if I have a moment during the session, I'll try and retweet some of those as well. Just a couple of other things to say before we go into Martin's presentation. We are already recording the video, recording the meeting rather, and the recording will be shared publicly and with you all specifically after the webinar. So we suggest please do not share anything in the pods that you don't want to be shared publicly. We will be sharing the recording of the meeting and also the slides that we're sharing, and also a typescript, or rather a transcript of what you've been typing in the chat pods throughout the meeting. All of that will be shared with you afterwards, so you'll have a record of the meeting afterwards, including for IAF India the participants list. So it's great to see so many of you here. Just if you haven't already, please do respond to the pods in the center. as well as to the general chat on the right. It looks like Mumbai is where we have the largest contingent from, 8 people from Mumbai. It looks like only 1 from the UK, but I know that there's 2 of us, Martin. You haven't responded to the poll, evidently.
I'm right here.
You're right there, exactly. And we have quite an experienced group as well. 9 of us have facilitated more than 100 times. And nobody has facilitated never, so that's interesting. So thank you all for your introductions. I hope we'll hear from some of you by voice a little bit later. But first of all, let's go to the next stage of our agenda. We're going to switch off our video connection for now in order to reduce the demand on the bandwidth. And I'm going to invite Martin Farrell to share some slides and something of his experience of co-facilitation. And while he does that, please do feel free to use the chat pod on the right to share questions and comments. We'll have a Q&A after the presentation and then some more discussion.
Well, I'm ready. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Well, why is co-facilitation worth thinking about? That's my first thought. And I think co-facilitation is one of the ways in which we can advance the profession and develop our skills because it's challenging, because it's difficult, and that's why we do it. We advance our skills and we advance the profession, and also by co-facilitation we strengthen our community because we're standing in front of a group together, and that binds us together. So it's well worth doing. I also, when we were first asked, Martin and I were asked to do this, I thought, well, I don't know anything. What can I say? What can I say? And then I noticed that when I started thinking about it, I did have some things to say. And I imagine that everybody on this call, if they had had the similar experience of being asked to do a session on co-facilitation, would have had things to say. And that's because we have all had teachers. We've all had teachers who are people we've worked with and from whom we've been open to learning from. So at this point, I really want to honor my teachers and the people who I've co-facilitated with, the people I've observed, so that I've taken in what I've seen them doing, and then somehow it's become part of me. This process of preparing for this webinar has helped me articulate it. So I appreciate all of them. I also recently came across with Martin and Sunny your suggestion and recommendation, a book, Understanding Facilitation, Christine Hogan, which has a chapter on the co-facilitation. I found that very helpful. We'll put that information in the chat box or somewhere you can get that. So that is in one of my sources as well, which has helped me to articulate. So you will see the picture on the screen at the moment of me and my friend and colleague Richard Chapman. This was taken the day after we had facilitated a team building retreat in Qatar in 2012 for the UN and the government of Qatar. And this was our moment of celebration. We went out to the desert. In fact, the client got a vehicle and said, yes, we can, they would show us the desert. So we were celebrating. So I also want to appreciate Richard in this. He's one of the people I've co-facilitated with. I'll be saying more about that in a little while. But right now, what I'm going to be doing is structuring 4 points. My initial contribution will be in 4 points. When are 4 hands, or indeed 6, better than 2? What forms can it take? When we say co-facilitation, what do we mean? And then the joys, the advantages, the good things, the things that make us happy, and then the sorrows. And those 2 things go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. They are both there in abundance when you are facilitating with another facilitator. And then we have time for question and answers. Indeed, the questions can be there now. You can be putting them in now into the general chat if you wish. We will, however, be allowing a couple of minutes after I've spoken for you to contribute your own, for time for you just to concentrate on that. We'll play some music and you can put your questions and we'll pick those up, and I and we will answer those as best we're able. So let's start then with when. When is it a good idea to jump into that lake. Because you don't know, like with this lake, you don't know how cold it is. You are prepared to do it, and to some extent you're taking a chance. Why on earth should you do that? You don't know what's under the surface. Why should you do that? There are 8 reasons that I came up with. You could probably think of more, and I encourage you to be thinking as I'm talking and maybe making a note of other reasons that I perhaps haven't identified. One is, and the primary, is that it's easier for our clients. We do facilitation. We make it easy for our clients. If we honestly judge that it's going to be easier for them, we will provide them a better service by facilitating together. We should suggest that to them. So number 1, it's easier. Secondly, this can be a way in which we can enhance our skills. In fact, this co-facilitation today, one of my motivations, as well as wanting to be able to pass on whatever I know, is to learn the technology of Adobe Connect, which I'm not experienced in. So I'm learning while we're doing this. So I'm expanding my skills and knowledge by this co-facilitation. I also had an experience of that. In fact, it was in an IAF context when I was asked to co-facilitate something with someone. And he said, oh, I've got a method for that. Oh, I could do the so-and-so method, which I wasn't familiar with. He'd done a number of times. So we divided that session, that he ran that part of the session with the method with which he was familiar, and I ran other. I then learnt that particular method that he was familiar with. Of course, a large group. A large group. What is a large group? Well, I facilitated a group with someone. There was 175 people. I would have struggled to do that by myself. It so turned out she was an internal person from that organization. It was it was the UN, and we really needed 2 people. We needed 2 hands on deck. There was another experience when I facilitated an international event, and actually I did it myself. There were 94 people, and afterwards, on reflection, I thought, why didn't I insist on having a second person there? Because towards the end, it was 2 days. It was a 2-day retreat with 94 people in a very challenging environment with a client that was really quite struggling, and there were tensions. I was pretty done in at the end, I have to say. And there were 1 or 2 judgments I made at the end which were okay, but I think had there been somebody else there, they would have helped, because they would have taken over the baton at some point. I think of another time when I was racing to get to achieve the tangible product that the group had wanted, and we'd arrived at that actually. And I somehow was still racing. I was still driving and pushing through. And there was someone with whom I wasn't working as a co-facilitator, but who had facilitation experience. And she then said, Martin, I think, why don't I take this over now? And wonderfully, she just introduced a steadier pace, which at that point was what was needed. They'd done the work. I just couldn't stop racing. And she helped them digest and go more steadily. So the large group. There may be real complexity. Let me give you one example of that. Worked with a small organization in the UK, and I worked with someone who was pretty much half my age, a young woman, and when we worked with them, we realized that the age dynamic within the organization was very important. There was an older cohort of people who desperately wanted to pass on the baton but felt they couldn't. They wanted to pass on to younger people. The younger people were waiting sort of to be asked, and they were in a bit of a stalemate. We were able to model that complex dynamic and help them move forward with their strategic thinking, which is why we've been hired. Well, there may be a long process. Just imagine a running track, and you have to run round and round. It's 400 meters or something, and you have to keep on running. Well, imagine then that you have a baton, and you run one way round, then you can pass over the baton, you rest, somebody else runs the next, so you get a chance to rest. There may be a situation, and there's a hospice that I'm working with at the moment, where I'm leading on process. I can do that. The internal person, the internal colleague, is focusing on content because she knows that. And when we've presented the sessions, we've done a series of 5 at the moment, we're going through a cultural change. We've presented ourselves as co-facilitators. We're both doing both, but my primary focus is on process, hers is on content. Learning. You may say, I want to co-facilitate just because I want to learn stuff. That's why I'm here. I just want to learn. So we're always open to learning, but there may be a particular situation in which you say, yes, I really want to learn, so I want to be alongside that person. And finally, you may say, hey ho, you know, I just want to do this because I prefer working with somebody else. I don't want to be by myself. I just like working with people. And that's one of the reasons that I do this. I just prefer doing things with other people. So let's think now about forms of facilitation, of co-facilitation. So there may be a primary and a secondary. My main example of that comes to mind is after I'd taken a period out of 6 or 9 months of not working, my entry back into working was a wonderful opportunity. It was actually quite well paid, which was a happy chance. And they'd hired a lead facilitator. They said, we want someone to be a secondary facilitator. And that's what I did for 5 days. It was great. I was putting up flip charts and, you know, sorting out chairs and just noticing what needed to happen. And I was in that role the whole week. And she was very much the primary facilitator. There may be a process of tandem, sort of we're both equally together. And in the case study, which I'll give in a moment, or give after the questions and so on, that's what I've done with Richard and with others, that we have said we are equally in front of the group and we will do tandem. We will stand, one will be in front and then the other will be in front. There is a subtlety to that, point number 3, which is the contractor and subcontractor, because in that situation and in many other situations, like that, I've been the primary contractor and have then hired somebody else. So as far as the client is concerned, I'm the primary contractor, I've got to deliver. But when we're in front of the group, we're working in tandem. Number 4, process and content. So that's a form I described a moment ago. So that works. You say, yep, you focus on this and I'll focus on that. There may also be a dynamic where there's an external facilitator. It may be one of us who is helping, working with and alongside as an equal, an internal facilitator. There may be a situation where simply someone says, and I'm sure many of us on this call will have had perhaps younger people saying, oh, can I come and work with you because I would love to learn what you do. So there's an explicit agreement that they're there as learning, and then can still be equal in front of the group and in a learning capacity. And there are maybe also many people on this call who have longer standing professional partnerships. There's someone who they like to work with and they say, hey, we're going to do lots of things together. So they're in a sort of professional partnership to work together so they get used to each other. I see I've only 3 or 4 minutes left. Let's go through some joys here. Blind spots. This has really helped me notice some of my blind spots. I always, think that I'm doing it this way or that way and it's all fine, but working with somebody else, it shows you that you're to some extent stuck in habits. It can also, it's like going from a 6-string to a 12-string guitar. I don't know if anybody on this call plays guitar, but look, I've got a little bit of music here. So this is a 12-string guitar. There's real complexity to that, but of course the tone is beautiful and wonderful. So you're just expanding the range of the notes that you can offer to a group, like that guitarist there. You can stand in front of a group and not just tell people stuff, but they will see the different styles. Perhaps a little bit like the example I gave a moment ago, where there was one person who effectively became my co-facilitator in the later part of that 2-day session, and who was calmer than I was at that time, because I was driving. So she modeled a different style, which was really helpful and necessary at that moment. You may say, I want to do this as part of my own journey, as part of my own learning journey. I know this is more challenging, and I'm going to be out front there with somebody else. This is going to challenge me, and I want that, because this is going to help me gain insights which otherwise might not be available to me. Parallel working, well, of course, in a big group, or indeed even in a small group where there is complexity and there's lots of different stuff going on. Parallel working. So you're both doing stuff, but you're doing stuff, doing different things. In the Qatar case study I'll give in a little while, while I was facilitating with the group, Richard was keeping the boundary because there were all sorts of people trying to come into the room and mess things up, and he was sort of keeping the boundary. So he very explicitly took that role on. Also, I'm sure many of us on this call will be at points in a group where you go, what on earth is happening? You know, there's a moment of confusion. You're not quite sure what to do next. Those, of course, are the rich moments. Those are the rich moments, but they need holding. And you can have, with a co-facilitator, can turn to them and have that conversation. Of course, you can also have it maybe with a participant, but that's slightly risky because they're in the dynamic. So you can help by thinking about what's happening. You've got someone else there. And also, of course, you can just get some rest. If it's complex, difficult, whatever. That's what I didn't get in the example that I gave you, the 2 days with the 94 people. I should have got some rest. I was sleep deprived. It was okay, but it was really pretty exhausting, and I could have done with some rest. And so you do all of this so it gets easier and easier. And also it's a way of managing, not managing the profession, but upskilling the profession, and also a way of noticing by collaborating, is there a way in which there is someone who's in the profession who's actually not working that well? Because if you're working with someone, you're going to see that. When you're co-facilitating, there really is no hiding place. Martin G, I've had 15 minutes. Should I continue to this slide and then go to the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Another few minutes.
Yes, please, Martin.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at some sorrows here. This lovely painting of a man looking sad and sorrowful. There are sorrows in this. This is not easy because you've got another relationship to take care of. Of course, you're taking care of the relationship already, both with yourself, both your conscious mind and your less or your unconscious mind. You're taking care of that. Your mind is talking to your heart and your soul and your being and doing. So you're looking at that two-way working. You're also looking at the two-way working with the group as a whole. Now all of a sudden you've got somebody else to pay attention to and to take care of another relationship, which you are going to enter into at depth. So this is not to be done lightly. So there's a downside. You may see it as a downside. You've got to take care of another relationship. And small relationship cracks could be visible. Participants are going to watch you like a hawk. They're looking to see if you two get on okay. Is there anything, any disjunction, irritation? It's going to show up. There's a spotlight on you. If there's a spotlight on you, that can be a very uncomfortable place to be, and you may or may not choose that you want to be there. So you deal with your irritations behind the scenes. And I've had that with a number of people where we've said, look, we've really got to sort that out. My earliest learning was with Lois Gressley, who sadly died last year, who I collaborated with on a number of occasions. And in one situation, she was in front of the group, 30 or so people, and I thought she was in trouble. I thought she was getting stuck. So I kind of jumped in and almost literally, I think, and tried to save her. She gave me a hard time afterwards. She said, I just asked you to keep the time. I didn't ask you to try to save me. You then made it harder. So those irritations we had to air afterwards. We committed to each other that we would take care of those things and we would be brutally frank and honest. And she was, and I still remember that conversation in that cafe, from which I've learned, and I've not done that since. A couple of other points before we come to some questions and answers. Of course, it's quicker talking to myself than it is talking to another person. In one session, I remember, in one 2-day co-facilitation, I remember thinking, I know what to do next. I just kind of knew what to do. The person I was working with was working it out on paper and drawing diagrams and writing it out. And I got quite impatient, saying, oh, let's just do it. Let's just do it. And they had a different process. So I respected that. What we did actually was somewhat better and a nuance of what I'd been proposing. But you take that time and rather than just talking to yourself. You maybe have a client saying, blimey, we've got 2 facilitators. Are we really that bad? Are we really that, is it really, really such a difficult client? They may fantasize that. The contracting gets more complex. The contracting gets more complex. And it may be that there is either higher cost for the client or lower fees for the facilitator. In the situation where I was by myself with the 94 people, they said, that's the budget. No, we're not going to fly anybody else in. Do it by yourself. And I maybe should have argued that more strongly, or maybe should have accepted a lower fee, but the fee was already pretty low. So that is quite a challenge. And the complexity of the contracting is important to bear in mind as well. So at this point, and I realize we're 5 minutes over here, I'm just going to play the music, I think, although Martin G, the music button seems to have disappeared from off my screen, so maybe you would play the music.
Thank you.
For a couple of minutes. And
actually, yeah. Martin, it's not music time, because before we turn to the music, thank you for all of that rich content. That was fascinating, yes. and lots of food for thought there. In a few minutes, I'm going to hand over to Martin to facilitate all of us to share our insights. But first, I'm going to continue as facilitator for a few minutes and invite your questions and answers. Now, there's already, so I'm going to invite your questions, and Martin, I'm going to ask you to give answers, if I may. So there's already a question in the chat to the right from, where's it gone? From Benita, who's asking, can you please explain the 6/12-string guitar point again? And while you do that, please raise your hands if you have a microphone to share your next question by voice. And if you don't have a microphone, please add your questions to the pod on the right. So Martin, the point about the guitar.
Well, the point about well, okay, I'll be frank here. I thought it just sounded lovely, and I thought, well, it's double the complexity.
Right.
Playing 6 strings is hard enough. Now you have to play 12 strings. That is just much more complexity. You need to be able to play 6, but then you need to be able to work out the complexity of 12.
Yeah.
But what do you get from that? When I played the music, it sounded to me beautiful, and you have richer tones. There are more notes in there. There are subtones and octaves and a broader range. So you have that broader range of skills, if you like, the broader range of notes. That's what I was seeking to amplify. Also, I just wanted to play some music partway through my presentation, but there we are. And I used to try to play guitar. You hadn't given me a music button, so I just did it without telling my co-facilitators here.
Thank you. Please do raise your hand if you have a microphone and would like to speak. We'd love to hear your voices. In the meantime, there's also a question, Martin, from Illa. Are there any guidelines or norms for successful co-facilitation?
Now that's a very interesting question, and
coming up, don't we, after the break?
Yes, well, we certainly have the do's, yes, there are those, and those are simply my suggestions. What I understand is the impact behind this question is, are there any internationally or recognized standards of co-facilitation? If that is the question, I'm trying to think of the IAF competencies, and I don't know if there is anything in there about co-facilitation, which is an interesting point.
Sure that there's
and we
a
may
reference to co-facilitation. Sunny,
okay.
Do you happen to remember, or does anyone remember? Maybe we could look it up. I'm sure there's a reference there. I think being able to at least consider doing co-facilitation, I think, is an important skill of a facilitator.
Yes. Yes.
Sunny, do you remember?
Referring to the competencies, sorry, I was doing tech. Yes, there is a competency on your experience with co-facilitation.
Right.
So we want to know, have you done it, and what did you learn from it?
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Remind
so
Sunny, by the way, are you an assessor in the CPF program?
I am an assessor for the CPF program.
That's the right person. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. We take this as authoritative. What that says to me, in answering the question, is there is not a detailed standard in co-facilitation. It's simply that question.
Right.
And that's something maybe the association may wish to think about. Or it may simply say that you do all the competencies, but you need to be that much more intentional, that much more aware. A little bit maybe like virtual facilitation, where you're doing the same things, but there's a whole extension of the skills that you're offering because of the platform, because of the way it's done. But I will be offering some things that I think you really should do, and also some things that I think you should watch out for, which could well go wrong.
Thank you. We also have a question from Ajit saying, what if the group needs more clarification from one of the facilitators and not from both, meaning that they like one of the co-facilitators to clarify more?
What comes to mind is that's fine. And that requires generosity on the one who is, as it were, not being chosen. And that may or may not become, as it were, a difficult conversation in the cafe afterwards. If the group is asking for that, and that facilitator is the best place to answer, either they have the knowledge or they have the style, the personal qualities, then that's what should happen. I can give an example of that. With a 2-day facilitation, 60 people. It was part of the Paris climate change conference, where we brought together 30 people from the UN and 30 people from the government of France. And that was in 2015, 3 years after the Qatar case study that I'll be giving you. And in that, there was a moment when I was in front. We decided we were then going to go on to some practical work of sorting out all sorts of practical things. But then I just invited is there any reflections on yesterday? And we then went into a pretty deep emotional hole. And that was about the Copenhagen conference. I think it's okay to say this here. Anyway, I just said it. I won't say any more. But there was quite a lot of challenge and struggle about that was still in the room around their previous experience of some people in the room. And I was the best person to deal with that. And I wasn't, well, I think I was asked, because I was asked by the group to hold that moment, and I did. And then my co-facilitator and I spoke about that afterwards. So I think there is generosity needed here. And you do what you follow the group, the same as you would anyway.
Thank you.
I hope that adequately answers your question, Ajit.
Thank you. We have questions from Parag and Lata, both of whom have microphones. So I'm going to ask, first of all, Parag, would you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question directly by voice? We'd love to hear your voice.
So my question is, if there is if a participant wants to ask a question while there are two facilitators who are co-facilitating a session, who should answer? How do the facilitators decide how to respond to a question from a participant?
Okay. Well, my response to that is you're anticipating one of my do's, which is do be very clear who is in front of the group at any given moment. You may be physically, possibly both standing there, although it may be that one is out of the room, but you must know who is in control at that moment. So if a question comes, it's that person who fields that question. If they can't answer it, of course they will turn to the other, or they will manage the moment, but they are in charge at that moment. So imagine imagine a tandem, a bicycle tandem. You can't have both people on the front seat. You have one person on the front seat, one person on the back seat. But of course, it's quite easy to swap over. Say, okay, now it's time for us to swap over. Let's the person who was at the back can now come to the front. So everybody knows that they are at the front at that moment. And so they are in charge. As my story with Lois reminds me, she was in charge, and I kind of tried to push her off the seat. It's embarrassing to say that. I was just trying to be helpful because I thought she was stuck, but she wasn't. She told me that after.
I agree, Martin, and this is rather the implication of Sunny's comment. The facilitator who's up front will answer first. It strikes me that perhaps the metaphor of our session title here is a little bit misleading, although you do have a question mark there. 4 hands on the steering wheel? Well, perhaps not. Perhaps only two at a time on the steering wheel, but 4 or 6 on the pedals.
Yes, exactly, because the image, I remember when we came up with this, thought, hey, if you have 4 hands on the steering wheel, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to get into trouble. So, yes, there should be a question mark there. Well, there was a question mark there because you don't want that, you want 2.
And if you're on a tandem, my advice is don't switch who's at the front on the steering while you're in motion.
Also a good idea. And also hold on with both hands. Yeah.
Wait for a break before you swap roles.
wait for a break and make it clear. Say we are now swapping.
We had a question also from Lata. Would you like to unmute yourself, Lata, and raise your question directly? I see that you are unmuted. Please go ahead and speak. I'm not hearing anything from Lata. I wonder what it is.
I can see the question,
Yeah,
I think.
Unanswered. The question is, what if the group relates to one facilitator more than
the other? Yeah. This is tricky territory. And of course that can happen. And this is where you are very tested as a facilitator, because you're that person and you love that. You're very happy to be the chosen one. The other one, less so. I'm assuming that the impact of this question is not that it's made explicit, that there is someone in the group saying, we want you, not that person. I think if that happens, that's another discussion. But there's an implication that one is more capable or primary or better or something. And that therefore there is time to reflect on that. So this is where, if we follow our bicycle tandem analogy, you not only get off the tandem, you go and sit in a side room somewhere and you express what you need to express to each other. And that would be noticed by either the provocation from the chosen one, if I can call them that, about how they feel about it and how they feel chosen, and they may feel flattered, but also the other. This is why this is tricky territory, because that stuff happens. And in the case study, I'll give an example of some of the other stuff that happened for us on that occasion.
I would add, by the way,
a bit similar to that.
If the group or some in the group relate more to one facilitator than another, that is not necessarily a problem. In fact, that might be a good reason for having more than one facilitator. For example, if you're working in a group, I'm thinking of ICA UK colleagues working in Palestine. I've done some work in Palestine myself, although not specifically in conflict situations. But working with Israelis and Palestinians on the Israel-Palestine question, it was very important to have Israelis and Palestinians on the facilitation team, because to have only one side of a conflict like that represented on the facilitation team, even if the facilitators are being scrupulously neutral towards the content, the fact that they are who they are, makes a difference to whether or how they can win the trust of the participants. And you can easily see that. I think I can easily see that being an issue in a less entrenched conflict situation as well. Or just in relation to diversity. I mean, if you've got men and women, for example, in the group, it might be a good idea to have a man and a woman on the facilitation team, so that everybody in the group sees somebody like them up front.
Yeah.
I'm already overstepping the mark of my facilitation role here, so it's probably about time for us to move on, if I may, and switch roles. I'm going to invite Martin to be the facilitator now, and to give him the opportunity to put some questions to all of you, and also to me and Sunny. So Martin, over to you for our open discussion.
Thank you for so beautifully allowing me to sit on the front seat or whatever, passing the baton. And I know, Sunny, you're going to carry on, well, both of you are going to carry on taking care of the technical sides of this, because you're highly competent in that area. So I just ask here that reflect on what you've heard. Some of it may strike a chord with you. And for you to think, if you've been in those situations yourself, or if indeed you've observed it in others, what have been your joys and your sorrows? What are the things that have worked well for you? Your co-facilitation joys, and what are your co-facilitation sorrows, the things which have been scratchy or difficult. I'm going to play some music for a few minutes, and then we'll see what we have there, and then we'll pick up that discussion, and I'll be inviting Martin and Sunny both to offer their professional expertise in this area to see what we can make of that. So we're really co-learning here. We've offered some input. Now we would love you to offer some input which we can build on in order to learn together. So I'm going to play the music, or I'm just going to set my clock. I think, Martin, if I could ask you, I think we said 2 or 3 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be great. A couple of minutes, I would say.
Yeah, that's what I've done. Thank you for advising me. Okay, I just play the music. Just type in music. So. So keep these coming. We have another minute or so, but while I see contributions still coming, flowing so rapidly as they are, I'll allow that to go on a while longer. I think we'll pause in just a moment. So, wow, that was nearly 3 minutes, and we have a lot of contributions, which I know, Martin and Sunny, you are looking at, and you may pick out some points from that you wish to comment on, and also those who have microphone rights, I think there are 15 people or so, may also wish to amplify some of these points. And if so, all of that is okay. We now have a bit of a free space for 10 or 15 minutes to really dig into some of these points. So I wonder, is there anybody who would like to amplify anything that they've written, either under the joys or under the sorrows? We'll just see which one we land in and how we want to split those two. Is there anyone who's contributed who'd like to add? And then I'll ask Martin and Sunny if they have any observations to make.
Vanita's hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Sunny.
So, yes, please carrying on the text. So, yep.
Vanita, please.
That's Vanita.
All right.
Vanita.
Speak.
Good evening. So I have been co-facilitating for a few years now, and one of the constant battle I have in my mind while co-facilitating is when to interrupt or interject, because when you know the key message is not landing, and you really want to bring that out because it's for the learner impact. The whole experience of learners in our class matters the most. So it's not about who's facilitating and not. And I keep wondering, should I talk now? And if I talk now, what will happen to the credibility of the other person? And my mind keeps juggling and battling all the time. I really, really want to know from you, Martin, how do you actually manage that?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vanita. So your question, it's a little bit quiet, but I'll just repeat the essence of the question, which is, how do you know when to interrupt? So you feel the key messages is not landing. How do you know to do that, whether you're co-facilitating or not? Martin, Sunny, do you have a comment on that?
I could respond, yes, if I may. This is Martin. I suppose the glib answer is that it's one of a million things that you need to talk about with your co-facilitator before you facilitate together. And as far as you can, agree when does one of you interrupt the other or step in and contribute. I mean, your story, Martin, was a salutary one of what can go wrong if you get that wrong. Of course, it's not always possible to anticipate what might be necessary or what might go wrong. So I suppose the other answer I would say is that, and actually building on what Stephen has said in the joys column here, facilitate with somebody that you know well and trust. I think it's very important to be able to trust each other. And if you are sitting there as a co-facilitator watching your colleague facilitate, you need to be able to sit on your hands and keep your mouth shut. And even if they're not doing something the way that you would, well, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's why there's two of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we, Sunny, if you want to comment on that, please do. But let's first of all hear another question, and then maybe, Sunny, you might want to pick up both of them if you wish. So somebody else who's on audio who would like to amplify something, who's put their hand up. Please put your hand up and Sunny will indicate. Are there any hands up?
No, there are not.
No, there are no hands up. Sunny, is there anything that you see on either side, the joys or the sorrows, that particularly catch your attention?
Well, that last one from Vasha, who talked about holding the space as the co-facilitator being challenging. I have found having a co-facilitator who understands holding the space to be extremely helpful. And then also just knowing your facilitator well enough that you can give each other, you either have an agreed on hand signal, or over time you get to where you hardly even need that, to know to look to the other one and say, what have you got to say on this?
So it's almost as if you know them so well that you just know what they would be thinking. You don't need to say, you don't need to indicate, you just know that. So it's a bit like Stephen.
But when you don't, the preparation piece where you get really clear with each other, that because sometimes you're facilitating and you have in your plan that you're going to get to point Z later, and the other person is anxious because you haven't gotten to it and they leap in, and then you lose your train of thought. And it can really be annoying to not only to you, but to the group as well. So being clear ahead of time that you have permission from the other facilitator to leap in if you sense you need to. Now we've got two hands up, first from Vanita and then from Yatin.
Please, can we hear from one or the other of you? Just jump in. Or
go ahead, Vanita.
Yatin?
Yeah.
Vanita?
So
Yatin.
For me, this is Yatin. For me, co-facilitation is it's an intimate dance. So facilitator, co-facilitators seamlessly changing their roles, complementing each other, and at the same time keeping an eye on the group being guided to the desired outcome, which is meaningful to them. So who does what, when, and what kind of time allocation, these are things I used to think need to be beforehand well settled, well defined, but later through experience I realized it is in the flow. It has to be in the flow. And their understanding of each other has to be like
wonderful. Thank you for that delightful image, Yatin, of the intimate dance and being in the flow. Martin, Sunny, does that chime with your experience in any way? Are you dancers?
Oh, yes. Occasionally a clumsy one.
Okay.
I would say so.
Something like you had.
I would say so, absolutely. And one of my reflections, thinking of the joys of co-facilitation, it is, as I said a moment ago, it's very important to know and have trust in each other. And one of the joys for me of co-facilitating with ICA colleagues over many years is that because we have a shared methodology and sort of a shared philosophy of ICA as well, there have been numerous times when I've arrived at international ICA meetings or various other events where I've been required or expected to collaborate and co-facilitate with people I've never met before. Because we have that same understanding and same methodology, it can be quite simple and an extraordinary experience to be able to dive straight into that intimate dance with somebody that you haven't met before. So you don't necessarily need to know somebody very well, but you need to have a common language or a common understanding, I think.
Very good, thank you. Yes, I'm thinking of Sunny, when you see dancers together, and you're a dancer. Tell us about your dancing.
And Vanita had her hand up earlier.
Okay, let's go to the next question, please. We come to the next question. Is that Vanita? What do you have to offer us?
Oh, I'm sorry. I finished my question and I got my answer as well. Thank you.
Oh, very good.
Oh, we
Yeah.
do have another
This is
question.
one of the joys. Okay, another question.
The issue of, it comes from, is it Kanchan? Facilitators not being too open to co-facilitation as they perceive that their references are now shared and that the other person will contact his client.
Martin, what do you think about that?
Well, I suppose it goes back to my question of trust, doesn't it? I wouldn't want to co-facilitate with somebody who's going to steal my client.
Exactly. I have had to have those conversations with, particularly with people I don't know as well, to be clear that if the client, sometimes I've been asked to co-facilitate and then the client comes to me and says, we want you to do our next thing. I always go back to the original co-facilitator and say, I've been asked this, and I tell the client this, I've been asked to step in here, are you okay with that? And I'd be more than happy to pay you a finder's fee on it if you are okay. And if not, then I ask them to go back to the client because it is their client. I was just a secondary.
It occurs to me that I make an assumption about co-facilitation that might be worth making explicit. I think I have an assumption that if I co-facilitate with somebody that I choose to co-facilitate with. I mean, there have been occasions when I've been invited by a client to be part of a project and to be a co-facilitator with others who I haven't met and don't know anything about, in which case I'll say, well, okay, perhaps, but in that case it's going to cost you because it's going to take us time to get to know each other and to work out how we can, to build a team together and to the point where we can actually be performing rather than just norming or storming in front of our group. So generally, if a pair or a team of facilitators is required, I will suggest to the client that there needs to be a lead facilitator who takes responsibility of assigning the co-facilitators, and then the lead can ensure that the co-facilitators are people that they know and trust, and ideally that know and trust each other as well.
So what I'm hearing both in the question and both your answers is trust, and that may be there already. You've worked with someone for some years, you've chosen them, you've chosen each other because you trust each other. But if that isn't there, then there is a task to do to develop that trust in your work, and that of course can be quite risky because you're developing it whilst you're cycling your bicycle or while you're dancing your intimate dance. You're developing that trust, but which is an absolute requirement because that then models, I guess, the trust between the facilitator or facilitators and the group. So I hear trust. Do we have another few minutes for a couple of points before we move on? Are there anybody else who wants to put their hand up? Or do we see anything, Sunny and Martin, in the chat box, which I'm trying to read through? I see time management. This is on the sorrows side. Co-facilitators taking diametrically opposite point of view. That's a challenge. Having trouble thinking of any sorrows. I noticed, actually, when we started this process, that the whole of the joys side was full up before there was any on the sorrows. Now that may have been because, Martin, you'd said that I'm looking more to the do's rather than the don'ts, but I don't know, that's maybe interesting. Let's just notice that. That maybe there are more joys, or maybe we're just the kind of people who like to look at joys first. I don't know, but I noticed that.
I'm aware, Martin, that we're 60 minutes in. I'm thinking it might be a good idea to move on to part 2 of your presentation. Before we do,
certainly,
your hand raised. Was there something that you wanted to?
Well, I just wanted to say that the more comfortable you become and confident in your own facilitation, the easier it is to be vulnerable in front of the group and to say to them, so-and-so and I don't agree on this, so now you have 2 perspectives, or we're a little behind, let's see how we can pick up the pace. It's being able to be okay with what's going wrong in front of the group and relax into that and then support it. And let's move to the next slides because we are.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. If I may, I'll take back the steering wheel as facilitator for a moment.
You're on the steering wheel, you're on the front of the tandem, whatever image we wish to use, and we're still intimately dancing, a three-way dance.
Exactly. It's so intimate, I'm going to hand right back to you, Martin, to continue as presenter.
Okay. It's very intimate.
While you do that, I invite all of us who are here to continue to share your questions and comments in the chat pod. After part 2 of the presentation, we'll have a short opportunity for Q&A and another short opportunity for open discussion. So please, Martin, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, we've had our joys and sorrows, so we have such experience in this room, and I offer a little more here in two ways. One is to do just illustrating some of these points from a particular experience in 2012, and then I will offer some things to do and also some watch-outs. So this situation was in 2012. It was in November. It was in Doha in Qatar. I was asked by the UN Climate Change Secretariat, with whom I had quite a long-standing relationship. I'd run many retreats with them. They said, we would like you to come and run a team-building event for us, the UN team, and also the government of Qatar team, because there are going to be 17,000 people turning up to the annual climate change conference in Qatar, and we want you to come 5 days before and help us work together. When I asked initially, what is the purpose? What do you want to achieve with this? The answer was, oh, we just want you to get us all to love each other. So whilst I was amused by that, I was also a little bit troubled. I was also troubled, not troubled, I just thought, I need a bit more, something a bit more precise than just everybody loving each other. Also, they said, yeah, there'll be around 50 or 60 people. So this is not the Paris event that I mentioned before. This was an event 3 years earlier. Said, yeah, 50 or 60 people. Anyway, after a couple of months, they said, oh, actually, now the government of Qatar is very interested in this. They really like this. So actually, it's going to be 140 people. So do you want someone to help you? I said, yes. So then I engaged Richard, who is the friend, colleague who you saw pictured at the beginning. And it was a one-day retreat on a Tuesday, 17,000 people turning up immediately, 5 days later. And it was to build the team so that they could work together. These are people who had had email contact, they had had phone contact, the great majority of them had never met. And they were going to be thrust into this very challenging environment for 2 weeks. Richard and I were thrust into the challenging environment of trying to facilitate that day. So what did we learn? Which are the points that have already been in a way identified that we can illustrate with this? We learned the importance of the being on stage and off stage. We had choreographed the opening and certainly the first half of the morning pretty clearly, and that's exactly what we did. By the time we got to the second part of the morning and certainly the afternoon, we were to some extent not in free fall, but we were having to then work that out as we went, as the program evolved, to some extent in the way that we had anticipated, but in other ways, in different ways. But we were very, very clear there was one on the stage at one time, a bit like Wimbledon tennis. I don't know if you watch Wimbledon, anybody watches Wimbledon tennis. You've only got one person serving. That person then is sort of controlling what happens during those rallies. So what did we notice? What did we notice? We noticed we had differences that we didn't know about. We wrote an article about this, and we'll put the link to it in the information that gets sent. It was in the Global Flip Chart in 2013, and it starts with the exchange that we had. The article starts with the exchange that we had at midnight in a little cafe where we were trying to complete a report, which they said they wanted a one-page report immediately, and then we could do a longer report later. And we were struggling with this day's report, having been out to the desert and had a great time together and celebrated. And we realized we had some differences around, it was a simple thing, should we put our names at the bottom of this report? Now, I don't want to go into the nature of that debate, but we had different views, and it was intense. I can tell you, it was intense. We were exhausted, we were tired, we were also happy. We had different views, and we felt it was a matter of massive substance. Afterwards, we looked at it and we thought, well, actually, it wasn't such a big deal. We also found that we had differences about the way that we worked. I wanted to work later, he wanted to work earlier. Under normal circumstances, that might not show up. We discovered, and this is all in the article, we have different attitudes to food. I would just kind of work through lunch or get a sandwich or a nibble or something. He wanted to sit down and have a proper meal and rest and think and so on. And of course we had decided to, in the financial arrangements, which I'll come to in a moment, to share all the costs equally. And I found myself getting annoyed with him. I thought, blimey, I'm just having a small sandwich. He's having a 2 or 3 course meal. And these are things which probably under normal circumstances I would not have noticed, but I did notice them then, and they potentially could have been significant as far as our facilitation was concerned. So we noticed those subtle differences. We also noticed that we had substantially different strengths, and that we then played to those strengths. So my strength was the primary contact with the client. I'd known them. He at that point didn't know them. So I was a primary contact with the client. And he did all the research, background research, developing ideas. We designed the thing together, but he would do the research of methods and materials, produce the materials, got the materials. So we were able to play to each other's strengths. We had conversations about money. Okay, now let's talk about money. I think this is really significant, that I was contracted, he was subcontracted. We made it clear we made a distinction between our contractual client and the effective client. The contractual client were the UN, who were paying for all of this, not government of Qatar. They'd initiated it, and I was going to send a report. They were going to pay me. I was going to pay him. So they were the contractual client, but the effective client was everybody in the room. So when we were in front of them, everybody in the room, we said, we are serving all of you on behalf of the contractual client, and we made that clear to them, and it was very clear to us. We had conversations about how we would share the money, and we shared it on the expenses were 50-50. We had a fairly complicated arrangement for sharing the expenses and keeping track of them, and we then said 2/5 and 3/5. So I got 3/5, he got 2/5. We went round this and debated this for days and days beforehand, complicated by the unclarity by the client about how much they were actually going to pay us, which was another issue. So we did 2/5 and 3/5. Now that changed because in subsequent facilitations that we did together, we said we're just going to do this 50-50, because that then felt right, because we were equally placed. But at this point we were not equally placed, and we both put hand on heart, looked at each other and said, what do you feel is good? And we rehearsed different scenarios, and we came up with that. Had we not got that clarity about the money, I think we would have got into difficulties in front of the group. So it was a one-day event. Let me give an example of the roles that we shared, and then I'll move on to the next slide in our last 20 minutes to look at some do's and some watch-outs. The morning, as I say, we'd choreographed very clearly, and it worked as we'd anticipated, including scenarios that we presented the group with. Said, if you're imagine that this conference it goes over time, it's delayed, what are you going to do? How will you all work together in your media, your security, your power management, your registration? What are you going to do? And we did that scenario. Hey ho, it actually happened, and we worked on that equally and together. However, in the afternoon we did different things, because by then they had developed about 60 things which needed to be, 60 issues which had to be addressed. Some that day, mission critical ones had to be addressed that day, others mission critical which had to be addressed 5 days later. I remember him saying to me, Martin, you just deal with, you lead this, you deal with this. So I did. And he then did all the things around. And that was wonderful for me. As the facilitator in front of the group, he was very present, but he wasn't in front of the group until right at the end. Because we had film crews wanting to come in and do filming. We had someone coming in saying, oh, can we do a photo shoot of everybody? So he really had to keep the boundary, and that became a substantial task. He also, we were still having discussions about water in the room. Now, this is a desert kingdom, right? It's surrounded by desert. So the cultural significance of water is probably very different from here in King's Cross in London. So he was trying to get water for people to be able to refresh themselves, doing all of those things so that I could then do the front of group facilitation. So it was, the spotlight was on. It was a one-day facilitation. It took us days to prepare for it and pretty lot of days to recover from it. And we still talk about it now and we celebrate it, which is another lesson here as I move into the do's. What we did in this is that we celebrated our success. And we were blessed by being given a driver, and they said, yes, so-and-so will drive you out in the desert. So we had that wonderful opportunity to go out in the desert and celebrate together. The next morning we'd recovered from our rather tense and difficult discussions and enjoyed our time together.
Martin, I hate to hurry you, but I'm going to ask you to rattle through the last couple of slides quickly, if I may, so we've got some time for discussion.
Very good. Do these things. You can read some. I'll do the ones that I will pick out. In front of the group, say yes and. Like improvisation. If you've done improvisation, you'll know that that's one of the requirements. You yes and, you're supporting what they're saying. You deal with your relationship irritations in private. You notice what's happening, the projections, the power, the tiny things, you notice those. You let go of your cherished habits, things that you think, of course it's got to be like this. You actively let those go because the other person could well have something better or equally good or better. And then you celebrate your skills, as I said we did, as it were, in the desert. Lastly, one stage at a time, we've said that. Don't allow small irritations to get inflated. Also, don't be too cautious. You're building a trust relationship here. This means that you can also be bold. Be absolutely transparent about money. We can, money, sex, death, difficult to talk about. In this situation, you have to talk about it. It has to be clear between you and to the client and everybody else. And if you do that, co-facilitation is a big challenge. You do all these things and it has massive rewards and it's absolutely worth doing. So with that, I think, Martin, thank you for hurrying me along. I'll pass back to you. And I thought, just look at the image. Isn't it wonderful? These guides are both surfing on a surfboard and having a good time. So that's what can happen. You can really enjoy this. But you can also fall off.
Thank you, yes.
But they're enjoying it. They're still on the surfboard.
It doesn't take much to imagine the risks, does it, looking at that picture? Thank you very much, Martin. That was a very rich example. Let's just take a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions for Martin. If you have a question, please raise your hand. If you have a microphone, we'd love to hear your voice. There's already a question from Stephen, a question or a comment. When you're choosing a co-facilitator, do you try and take care of gender or cultural balance? Would you like to respond to that, Martin?
Well, yes. Well, if it's a question directly to me, rather than should one do this in general, let me answer both of those. To me, I tell you what, I'm just pragmatic. Someone comes along of a particular gender or age or this or that, and I think, oh, I'd like to work with you. And then it goes from there. So I'm not being instrumental about who I might choose. It just happens. And I can think of, as Richard, pretty much my age, a bit younger, I can think of the person I referred to, a younger woman, which turned out to be really fantastically helpful. So I think of a whole mix. I think, I'm not quite sure what my answer would be, is should one look to have that balance? I'd be interested to hear any other comments that may be on that, because my sense is, of course, it feels right that there should be a balance of all sorts of things. Yes, of course, you should do that. But I'm not sure that's not how I work. It may be that is more important to others.
My own answer, I think, would be the answer that I give to most things about facilitation, which is it depends. Although I think
yes.
I think it's a very worthwhile consideration. I think it's a very important thing to consider. And there are times when that will be a primary consideration, other times when maybe something else will be.
Yeah, yeah.
I tell you what, because time is short, we haven't had any other questions yet. Let's move on to our discussion, and I'll hand back to you, Martin, as facilitator for a few minutes. Please take 5 or 10 minutes max, and then go to our closing after some discussion.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So I'll hold the baton. So responses let's look at the chat pod. And this is, I think, Martin, Sunny, responses from you that you may have to what you see in the chat. They may be building on the sorrows and joys that we had before. But also, is there one thing that you think that you would be doing, that you would be doing and picking up from what you've heard here? Let's see if anybody wants to raise their hand and offer any contributions about anything that they particularly picked up from this in our last 10 minutes.
Well, several are now typing, and Vanita has raised her hand. I know she had a question in the chat, so maybe go ahead, Vanita, while others are typing.
Okay, so my question is, I was reading this book called Faultless Facilitation, and in that book they write that a woman should go first to facilitate because it brings in, not because of the credibility, but it sort of brings in a buy-in. I wasn't very convinced, so I just wanted to know, because even Stephen had spoken about gender. What do you think of this statement in that book?
Sunny, perhaps you would like to comment on that first.
Well, it strokes my ego to go first, I'm sure, but
there you go.
I think the one that goes first is the primary one who's been contracted, and then they introduce their co-facilitator or the team. But I will take a look at that book now. What did you call it? Flawless Facilitation or Flawless Consulting?
It's called Faultless Facilitation by Loie B. Hart. I'll actually type
Faultless. Perfect. Thanks. Then we can all take advantage.
My answer.
Martin, do you have a comment on that? Would you say it depends? Yes.
Yes, of course. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. There are times as a facilitator you need to challenge a group and push them out of their comfort zone, and that, having a woman go first if the group is not accustomed to that, for example, that might be a good way of doing it. But there are also times when you need to keep a group safely inside their comfort zone in order to warm them up to something less comfortable later. So I can see different situations in which you might specifically want to have a woman or somebody by any other criteria go first or not.
Good point.
Yes, yes. Let's just see what we're seeing in front of the screen here about the things that you're going to be doing next, like trusting your intuition. Nitul says, Yatin says, go out for a drink, get to, do things off the facilitation grid. Contingency planning, rehearsing.
All of these comments are reminding me of what I wrote in both the joys and the sorrows, which is my experience of co-facilitation is endless reflection and learning, which can very much be a joy, but it can also be tiresome and at least time-consuming. There's an awful lot of preparation and reflection and learning required in order to co-facilitate well and come to co-facilitate better.
Yes, I understand. Yes, so it comes at a price, and there is endless reflection. I'm seeing celebration in capital letters. I think that's really important. I'm sure the three of us will be celebrating quite shortly.
Yes, absolutely.
And buy an ice cream or something. Yes. What else have we got here then? I know how to have a good time. Go and buy an ice cream. Yeah, it's a big deal. Co-facilitate more to create a 12-string guitar performance. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody else would raise their hand. It would be great to hear some other voices.
Yes. Yes. Please feel bold and empowered and emboldened. The facilitation community needs your contribution, whatever it is. Maybe you're thinking like me, oh, I don't think I have anything to say. I really thought that. I thought, oh, well, I suppose there's something. And then, as with all of these things, when we have such experience, because it's a lived experience, and I think everybody in this call, we know there is no one on this call with no facilitation experience. So everyone has lived experience, and we can delve into that and come up with some richness for other people.
Yatim's hand is up.
Please, Yatim. Maybe your microphone is off. If you're talking, we don't hear you.
I'm sorry, it was muted.
If you're not talking.
Yeah, it is muted. Thank you.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead. Yatim.
So for me, co-facilitation, I correlate this with the metaphor of rock climbing. I'm coming from background of mountaineering, and me and my first climber and second climber, the kind of understanding without exchange of words that have, and they or the second climber, the first climber realize what is needed at that very moment and provide for the same. That kind of understanding a co-facilitator should have. When you're appointing or getting a new co-facilitator, to me it is relevant to spend much more time off the grid, understanding the likes, the style, and all those kind of things. Anyone can fall into this place provided the understanding is absolutely clear, and to me, how much time he would do, what time I would do, that looks good on the paper, but while facilitating, the person who chips in when it is needed, that is what to me makes a very good co-facilitator.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have dancing, we have rock climbing, we have all sorts of guitars, we have all sorts of images which are helping us. We're just going to be finishing in 5 minutes, so Martin, it might be a moment to hand back to you, unless you think we should take another question.
Yes, thank you. I think it would be a good time to move to our close. Lots of comments there on what we might take away from this session, so thank you for those. I think those comments will remain on the next screen. Yes, you can continue to add to those comments. No, sorry, you can't add to those comments. You can continue to add to the general chat in the top right of this screen. In our final 5 minutes, we'd like to invite you to reflect on the session as a whole. And in the chat pod on the left, tell us what worked well about this session. And in the chat pod on the right, what could have been better. We invite you also, when the recording has stopped in a few minutes' time, I'll let you know when I stop the recording, and at that stage I encourage you to share any contact details you'd like to share in the chat pod on the right. And then finally, before we close, if you look at the bottom left of your screen, you can see some links to further resources, to my website, to Martin's, to Sunny's, also to the book that Martin mentioned, Christine Hogan's Understanding Facilitation, and also to the case study Martin has been referring to in Qatar, which is written up in an article in Global Flipchart. So
I believe that's bottom right, not bottom left.
Thank you, bottom right. Yes, did I say bottom left? Yes, indeed, that's bottom right. So I would ask you to share some feedback in the two pods in the center. We'll give you a moment or to do that in writing, so that we have that as a record also for our report to feed back to you. And perhaps while you do that, I'll invite Nasi to begin to say a few closing words. Nasi.
Yeah, thanks Martin G, Martin F and Sunny. Extremely enriching experience, and I'm saying this quite sincerely. The way six hands manage the wheel with tremendous dexterity made our drive an enjoyable one, comfortable and safe. Yes, Martin F, definitely it is the tandem cycling demonstrated exceedingly well, and I'm quite amazed by the time management also. Without rushing, you manage the time so well, and I'm used to some of the facilitators saying hurry up, no, it's not done here. So thanks to the discerning participants who posted their comments and queries with such an enthusiasm. You have all been such a wonderful bunch. I'm sure the facilitators must have been happy with this bunch. of participants. So anyone who needs further assistance from the...
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Agree.
Thank you so much. So anyone needs further assistance from
Very
the
much.
facilitators or the organizers, please come on our IAF India Gmail from which you got the link. So see you at our next webinar in the 3rd week of August. Bharti is coordinating with a superb facilitator once again. And I know the topic, it's very interesting, but I prefer to keep the suspense up and make you curious till we announce it. So stay tuned, and good night on behalf of IAF India, everyone. And once again, a million thanks to Martins and Sunny Walker. All of you have been wonderful, simply wonderful. A lot of learning today. Above all, seeing is believing, and we really experienced what is co-facilitation instead of being taught about it. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Definitely a pleasure.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure.